I'm not drinking a beer today, guys, because I have Hayden with me.
Ken, do that great introduction again.
Oh, we're very fortunate to have Mr. Bill Tobin from ShelterBox. He's an expert in this area of Rotaries meeting people's needs in the world and in local communities around the world. So, Bill Tobin, please share us your knowledge.
Well, thank you very much for having me here today. And you guys are trouble. I tell you what, this club, I can't wait to actually meet you guys all in person, because I'm just in El Dorado Hills outside of Sacramento. So it's not like I'm, miles and miles away, but yeah, I can look out for you guys.
Well, I mean, fortunately, you're closer to the Hasslers than we are.
Oh, you know the Hasslers. Of course you do. Of course you do. Roger and the better half. Angie, I know. Yeah, I see them. They're in the Cameron Park Club, so they're just one club over, but they're in a totally different district than I am. So, we see each other at some, fundraisers that we all attend and stuff, but they're doing good, having a good time up here. They live in El Dorado Hills, a beautiful place. You guys ought to go crash it one time for a social. So anyways, well, thanks for asking about it. I knew that association. I actually knew that. I'd forgotten all about it. So how nice. I'll pass on your condolences. I mean, hellos.
No, please don't. No, it's fine.
Okay.
Actually, Roger was in our meeting last week.
Oh, okay. So then he's really gone the pot. He's not doing very well. No, just teasing.
Yeah.
All right. So we could carry on like this all day. I have no problem. It's a great relief from this world we are all living through right now. But I need to get serious here for the next 15, 20 minutes. And so I'm going to share my screen and talk about ShelterBox. And it's really kind of a celebratory year for us, because we're 20 years old this year. We were started by a Rotary club in England, and it was just a club like yours, probably not even nearly as fun as yours, but it was a club that looked at the world and had a couple of quasi experts in the club. One was a retired search and rescue diver, so kind of knows what it takes to survive in extreme circumstances. And they looked at the world of disaster relief, and they saw that it wasn't being done right, and there was a big gap in proper shelter. What wasn't done right was basically it was airlifted and dropped in, or it was pushed off the back of a truck. And we're Rotarians, and we would never treat people that way, because the ones that need it the most rarely get it when aid's delivered like that. So they were going to actually hand deliver aid to families, and the initial goal was 20 families. So if you know something about our history, we've reached a lot more than 20 families, but that was the initial goal. And I should point out now that although we are official project partners of Rotary International, we're not a Rotary International's project. We stand on our own. We're our own organization that was started by a Rotary club. And in that same context, we don't fall under the Rotary Foundation. So I know a lot of clubs are raising money, and ours are as well, for COVID-19 response. And they're doing a big telethon this weekend for Rotary. That's great, but ShelterBox, we raise our own money. So, that's just something that needs to be a distinguishing a line there, and that's basically it. But the partnership's amazing. It has been since day one, and what we really try and do in the world is deliver shelter to families that need it, and some tools as well, household items that really transform their lives and helps to rebuild their communities. And we have several different tents. We have tarpaulin-based shelters, so folks could use tarps instead of tents. It seems kind of backwards, by the way. We love our tents here in North America. A lot of cultures would look at tarps and actually prefer that because of the adaptability of their shelter using tarps as opposed to the rigid framework of a tent, and then the repurposing of those materials after they've rebuilt their house and what they could use those tarps for. A tent's basically always going to be a tent, although people do come up with some pretty neat things they've done with the tents after they've rebuilt their homes. Then there's all the other essential gear, the pots and pans, for example, mosquito nets and solar lights, some good quality hand tools. I love Swiss Army knives, but that's not going to help you in a disaster. A good section of nylon braided rope. We kind of take rope for granted around here as well, but oftentimes we'll distribute the rope and families will cut off 20 feet of it or so, de-strand it. They've got a lot of high quality, strong nylon thread, and they could repair fishing nets, for example, or do fabric repairs on either clothing or tarp-based shelter that they may already live in. And it's really about the families we help. We're always looking for those that need it the most vulnerable segment of a community after disaster strikes. And that could be a female head of household, or sometimes even a child-led household in certain areas of the world. That's not that uncommon. You could have families with young children, or the elderly, or someone who has disadvantage either physically or mentally. Those are your most vulnerable segments. And of course, children. You know, kids don't realize that it gets cold all over the world when you figure, even here in the Philippines, like this picture, there is a cold for them at night. We might think it's not cold, but for them it is. And that kind of exposure leads to sickness. So it's really important that we reach these families. And to us, I mean, this is just a couple of tarps. And they're high quality tarps, don't get me wrong. They're molded. There's stuff you see, temporary event centers sometimes are made out of this fabric style tarp. These aren't the ones we buy and cover our firewood with and watch it disintegrate through the summer sun. These are high quality tarps, and that's what we look at in this picture when we see tarps. But this family sees much more than a tarp, but they see it as their home. And families take pride of ownership, and when we're able to repair a home or completely replace a home, it's something that families really need for their health and their safety, and for a place to call home until they can rebuild their own. Most cultures don't have home insurance, and most families around the world wouldn't be able to afford even the amount of lumber you see in this picture just in one delivery. So families really piece their homes together over time. And if you've visited other countries, you've seen this. You might have thought, that's an unfinished house, but it's probably not. It's probably a family that is building a house while they're living in it. So over the 20 years, we've had some pretty remarkable milestones, things that put us on much grander world stages and really developed this network of Rotarian support we've had around the world. And one of those was in 2004 after the Indian Ocean tsunami on Boxing Day. So it was actually early 2005 when we geared up the response. In over 4 countries, we were able to help over 22,000 families. And then in 2010, the earthquake in Haiti. Now, of course, in the years in between, we weren't just sitting around idling our thumbs. We helped hundreds of thousands of people, over dozens of responses each and every year. We're at least, last year we were in 11 different disasters. So that's basically one a month, plus our ongoing work with refugees. So, but Haiti was a big milestone for us. For one, it was very close to North America, so we got huge support out of the US on this one. And for 2, it was at the time the most people we'd ever helped in a single response. And that was close to 250,000 people, about 35,000 households. And then we have our Syrian crisis response, which has been ongoing since late 2012. The whole crisis began in spring of 2012 with the Arab Spring, if you may recall that term. This has been an ongoing deployment over multiple countries, including in Syria, that has virtually had no breaks in the time since we started, and it now has become our largest per person or number of people served deployment at over 50,000 families in response to the Syrian wars. And so that's a kind of a snapshot of the 20 years. I want to go a little bit more in depth, and this is a map. And don't worry, if you're on a phone or you can't see your screen real well, I'll send a PDF of all these slides out to you so that you'll be able to share them that way. Every green country on this map is a country we have done a response to. We rarely respond in America. The last time was after Hurricane Harvey down the Houston area. And reason being is we're looking at the entire world, and there's disasters going on all the time that affect countries that have no or little resources, and very few compared to what we have here in the United States. Now, there's about 88 million people displaced right now in the world due to disaster, and roughly 35% of those are in need of some kind of shelter that's better than what they have. And out of this number, 17.2 million, the natural disaster number is really not considered out of what's expected or the average that would be expected based on the global population. That's counting all the folks up in Paradise that had to relocate for a period of time, flooding in the Midwest, and of course, everything that happens all around the world. It affects 17 million people. And that's pretty consistent year in and year out, although it does have its peaks, like after Haiti, where the number goes up considerably. But conflict, 70 million people, that's 41 million internally displaced within their own country, 26 million that are refugees and have flee left their country for another country, and about 3.5 million asylum seekers, which those are folks that want to have permanent residence somewhere else. So kind of, a misnomer that countries that take refugees in will always have those folks. That's really not true. As well over 95% of refugees want to return home to their country of origin. But the number about the conflict is sad in one real respect, and that's a number now that is greater than World War I, World War II, Vietnam, and Korea combined. So all the people displaced through those great wars of last century doesn't equal 70.7 million people. Now you might think, well, the world's not at war. How's that possible? And of course, it's because we have a much larger global population. So how does this partnership work? Started by a Rotary Club. Obviously, clubs do fundraising for us. It raises millions of dollars for us around the world each year. They'll put on entire events. And I guess you could do dueling pianos. At least the pianist would be social distance between each other. But, they do entire events for us. Clubs put us in their annual budget. A district governor came up with an idea of hero clubs a few years ago. And so that was so successful up in New York that we rolled it out across the country. But it goes well beyond the dollars and cents. It's volunteer opportunities. Rebecca was just saying earlier, seeing me and hearing about us at PETS and having the tent up. Those are our ambassadors. And I'd love to have more ambassadors in 5170 so we can reach more clubs and share this mission that we're doing and the impact we have in the world. And what's nice about being ambassadors, when you go visit another club like I did here today, I learned about your club. And I know now some ideas to bring back to my club, like maybe have a little bit more fun in that social time and poke a little fun at each other because, people need that right now, But oftentimes it's things like a better engagement with RYE students or fundraising ideas. Now bring those ideas I hear at clubs like yours back to my club, and it's made our club stronger for that. So it's not only sharing outward ShelterBox going to Rotary, but it's also bringing back that makes this partnership so special. Our response team members, the large majority of them are Rotarians, and they go through about a year's worth of training. There's tests, there's online school, there's in-person assessments, and that is, the success rate's only around 20%. So a lot of people think they want to do it, but when they get into it, they realize it's really not for them. It's totally different than, say, an immunization trip. It's not even the same ballpark. We're dealing with people in life and death situations. But if that's something that you have a calling for, by all means, ShelterBox is a wonderful way to do that in the world. And after all the time we kind of demand on you for your year's worth of training, we only ask 2 to 3 weeks on your schedule to help us during the year. And it goes even further in this partnership. Rotary clubs donate warehouse space all over the world where Rotarians have space where they could let us put a few hundred boxes, a couple thousand boxes in some cases, or just specific palletized gear so we can get it to that last destination somewhere that much quicker. When a disaster strikes, 9 out of 10 times in our natural disasters, Rotary clubs are the face of our work in that area of disaster. They help on every aspect from importation and translation to transportation. As you can see in a flooded situation, you couldn't drive here. We had to get creative, and Rotary clubs, each one of these boats has about at least 1,500 pounds worth of boxes on them. So you could tell that this was quite an undertaking for a Rotary club. But I think more than anything, Rotary clubs provide us with information. Now, I'm kind of familiar with the South Bay and Santa Cruz. I kind of know where Almaden Valley is on a map. I don't think I've ever been there. I hope to be there. But if there were a disaster there and I was just a relief agency looking for your most vulnerable segment of your community, it could take me days or weeks to find those folks. I might never find them. But if I came to your Rotary club, we'd figure it out in a matter of minutes and have a game plan in a matter of hours. And that would be one of your members and one of our members taking the back of your picture in a situation where we're doing an assessment to find those families together that need our help so much. And it's not an exclusive partnership. We work with the Red Cross and several other aid organizations around the world, both big and small, to reach families in need. But Rotary is by and large a part of this process from start to finish, especially when it comes to dealing with the beneficiaries themselves. Sure, we could fly some folks out. We only have 130 response team members around the world, so we can't send a plane load, but we can send some folks out and kind of take control. Sure, but we'd rather send some folks out and engage Rotarians, train them on some of the basics of what we need to get accomplished, and then let them be the face of our disaster relief work. It's so important on many different levels. First, language barriers, cultural differences, those are eliminated because they're working with the locals. And then secondly, it's putting prominence upon a Rotary Club in a disaster relief. And we've seen this happen in California with some of our major fires, how Rotary Clubs kind of, you know, they get attention because they're active in these responses. Where we are in the world, these types of things have such great dividends down the road as these clubs that we work with are growing after the response work because they're the ones seen as the heroes in their community. And ShelterBox is just enabling that process. But it really doesn't end there. It doesn't even end after we leave. We always do what's called post-distribution monitoring. And that way it helps us evolve and improve and sometimes finds additional gaps where we might be able to fill them then and there, or we might be able to direct Rotary Clubs on ways to help that. And so we have Rotary Clubs go to a segment of the beneficiaries of which they have already served and do some follow-ups. And it's usually something that, thumbs up, thumbs down, rate 1 to 5, some comment areas. I think in this picture, they're just putting like happy faces on things that they like the most. And it's really beneficial for the entire process. Now, right now, we're real busy around the world. It's hard to believe we could be this busy in light of this pandemic, but we're even busier because of the pandemic. And just earlier this morning from a quote yesterday, and again, you might not be able to read this on your screen, but you'll get it in a print form. John Hugo has really put an emphasis on how important ShelterBox is, a vitally important part to play in this global response to COVID-19. Why ShelterBox? Why are people who are refugees, say, or displaced due to disaster, why are they especially at risk? Well, number one is population density, whether it's an evacuation center after a fire or a flood or a hurricane, or in the case I'm going to show you here, refugee camps. Population density is critical. We have to separate families. In Wuhan, we were looking at 6,000 people per square kilometer. That's pretty tight quarters right there. Do the math for your community and you'll see 6,000 is pretty tight quarters. The Diamond Princess, a cruise ship, if you've ever been on one, at times you see them alone and at other times you're in with 24,000 other people per square kilometer. But that all pales in comparison to the Rohingya refugee camp in most camps around the world. And people are stuffed in at rates of 30 to 40,000 people per square kilometer. This is a Rohingya refugee camp we work in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. And these are not single family dwellings. These are dwellings that are literally wall to wall people all year round trying to survive. And most would not have roofs over their heads without the tarps you see in this picture. So you have density, but then you also have the obvious, medical care. There isn't any, there isn't enough. The testing labs are almost non-existent in many of these countries where we're responding. And when COVID takes a hold in these countries, which it's starting to, and I'll show you a graph in a second, it's going to be devastating. And again, I want to illustrate that we don't do this work alone. And not only a partnership with Rotary, but we partner with all kinds of agencies in what's called this global shelter cluster. And it primarily looks at sheltering refugees from conflict. This is a chart that the shelter cluster put out, and this is just a couple of days old, so these numbers are higher now. But every arrow to every one of the countries on this list is somewhere we are actively responding right now. It's all refugee areas, but for one, and that's Philippines. They do have refugee problems in the very southern part of the nation, but that's not where we are right now. We are currently on the island of Cebu. They have had, they can't keep up with the COVID-19 patients. You see here in the United States, especially in New York, there were temporary tents and stuff that were set up outside of some hospitals that were used for triage and for some treatment. They are overwhelmed in the Philippines right now. So ShelterBox has actually launched a COVID-19, a specific fund to help our efforts, not only here in the Philippines, where these are going to go to the Eversley Child's Hospital, tarps, ropes, and other gear going to them so they could expand their triage area to accommodate an additional 100 patients per day. So these are some significant numbers that we're able to affect. And this is just the beginning there. I have a feeling this one's going to grow. And this is in Syria, and this is within the last few weeks. And normally you wouldn't be able to tell where one family ends and the next begins because there wouldn't be any social distancing. It'd just be one line of folks. We give them gear, we train them on that gear, and they go on their way to the areas that they live or have been assigned. We can't do that right now. So our reach is shorter because we can't reach 500 families in a day. We're lucky to reach 100. So there's that hurdle that we're working through right now, but it's so desperately important. This is a refugee camp in Nigeria, and those centers, the buildings are collection centers, which is just like Cox's Bazar. There's family next to family next to family next to family, and it's so important for us to get families out of those and into tarp-based shelter like this, tented-based shelter like this, in areas like Lake Chad Basin, where COVID-19 is now in these countries, Cameroon, Nigeria, Chad, Niger. This is a triple whammy, for lack of a better term. First, they had a prolonged drought, and I'll show an example of that in a second. Second, 2.5 million plus people displaced due to Boko Haram violence. That's a massive amount of people. This is Lake Chad Basin. They had a drought that lasted over 20 years, and although the rains have returned, you'll never replenish this amount of water once the 6th largest lake on the planet, natural border between 4 countries, and this is what's left of it. Imagine being a family in Niger who always, for centuries, for generations, went to the water's edge, which marked the boundary of the edge of your country, and it also marked life, because water is life. And now you have to travel 100 miles plus, cross 2 borders to try and reach that type of water supply. Obviously, it's an area that's ripe for political violence, and there has been. It's an area that's ripe for inter-community violence, and it has been, but it's particularly an area that's just infested with Boko Haram, and they're just doing so much damage to people there. In 2013, we established a camp, and it's called Minawao, and you are more than welcome to go on Google Maps. Here's an example of what you find on Google Maps, Minawao, it's even written right there, and look it up, and this is what it looks like today. There's a little red circle. You won't get that on Google Maps. I supplied that, but you'll have no problem finding what I'm about to show you, which, as we zoom in on a population of what's now 67,000 people, we are looking now at ShelterBox tents, which are scattered all throughout this camp, along with tarp-based shelters, which are the square rectangular shelters you see within this circle. This is about 50 families worth right here. So the need is massive. People are showing up all the time. We're in the camp right here. And I think the first thing to be, somewhat proud of is Rotary and ShelterBox working in one of the most desperate areas in the world. And that's something to be proud of for both our organizations. But if you look around this picture, you'll notice this is almost all women. And it's absolutely true. Over 80% of those that come to the camp are women and children like Esther. Esther witnessed the murder of her 3 older brothers and her mother and her father, and the bounding of her little brother for slavery when Boko Haram raided her camp a few years ago in northern Nigeria. It was a very common practice, and still is today, for Boko Haram to raid these villages, kill everybody of fighting age or tries to resist, bound all the youngest members of that village, male and female, for slavery. Most of the girls are put into human trafficking for sex or labor. Most of the boys are held within the militia to grow their militia through coercion, force, and of course some sort of brainwashing over time. And then the girls and sometimes the elderly and those that are, I hate using the term, but what they would consider it disposable. These are the people that are told to run. And the sickening thing of this is that the people they've kidnapped prior to the current raid, those young boys are waiting out in these villages under a kill or be killed order to try and become killers. And it's horrible. And it's happening in the world now for over a decade. And it seems as though nobody knows. Esther has a very traumatic past, but I'm a silver lining kind of guy. I'm an optimist, and she's got, and so is she. She's got to be, because now she's learned how to sew. She's really good at it. She wants to go back to Nigeria. She wants to be the best dressmaker. I mean, those types of ambitions are And that positive outlook on the future is a direct result of the way these people are handled when they're in these refugee camps. And if they're handled well, like we do in our camps, there's a brighter, peaceful future for them. And part of what we do is train people. We don't just hand them gear and say, here, next. We take a point, even something as simple as a gravity fed water filter, which anybody on this call, anybody, any kids in the room with us could figure this out in a second. But we can't take this chance with these folks. They're barely, they're at the point of malnourishment, mostly leaning on the malnourished side. Their water supply can't keep up with the demand of the people. There simply isn't the water. So the filtering, nothing is keeping up with the amount of people coming in, to put it mildly. And so something as simple as a gravity-fed water filter makes a huge difference for these families. And still in these situations, it's so important for us to learn and evolve to become better at what we do. So I think this is a wonderful spot to show that we are isolating families. They wouldn't feel more improved levels of privacy if they didn't have privacy. They feel safer at night because of things like solar lights, and they're more confident. I think that's the most important thing here. We take the time to treat them as human beings. We build their confidence. We teach them how to use their gear and sometimes even how to build shelters for themselves. And I think confidence leads to trust. Trust leads to peace. I think it's a formula that over time will work through those that are affected the most by violence. We can't stop Boko Haram. That's going to be up to governments. Rotary and ShelterBox can't do that, but we can take care of the folks that are displaced by those types of terrorist groups. Real quickly on Syria, it's still going on. There's a ceasefire, but that's mainly because of COVID, in my personal opinion. This is a map from a couple months back, and this little area where all the red dots are is where all the most of the violence is, and we are working in that area. ShelterBox folks, it's too dangerous. We can't get in the country. There is no such thing as a Rotary in Syria. There was from a period of the 30s through the mid-60s, but government regulations made it impossible for Rotary to continue there. So we rely on local groups like Hand in Hand for Syria, and these are folks just like us. You know, they're businessmen, they're shop owners, they're teachers, and they're the ones that are doing the work for us in the country. And we've worked with them side by side in country before, so we've developed a great relationship with them. And there are a couple other groups in Syria that have similar relationships with us, because families like this, it was a bitterly cold winter in Syria this year, and there were over 36 kids in Idlib that were documented froze to death due to exposure. So it's so important to get these families in the proper shelter. Now, yeah, we're called ShelterBox. In this picture, there's no box, and the bottom line is, if we get something somewhere, we need to get it there in a hurry. We aren't going to make that intermediate stop and repack everything from a factory and put it in a box, because we source gear from all over. So if we're going to put it in a box, we'd have to have a stop somewhere along the way. So a lot of gear like this will partner with other organizations in Syria or who are working in Syria, and we'll combine our supply chains. And at that point, it's whatever means possible. Sometimes just on a pallet in a factory box. That's how we'll get it to the border. And then those families will get gear that way. So the green box, we use it a lot. All our pre-deployed stuff has the green box. And you saw in the Philippine ones earlier, we do distributions in boxes when we can. But in Syria, there just isn't time. So in conclusion, families like this really need our help. Without us, they have next to nothing. And a nightlight to any young man is a comfort, or young girl. I can't imagine what it would be like in a war situation to not have a little comfort at night if you're a child. I'm a Rotary Foundation major donor. I was the past Polio Plus chair for my district, and I love the Rotary Foundation. But ShelterBox does raise its own money and does its own operations. So the 4-star charity navigator rating is ShelterBox's. And I think our impact in the world, better than anything, is measured by now being nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2018 and 2019. So that's a 25-minute look at a 20-year history. Thank you so much for your time. If there is time and any questions, I'd be happy to take them now, and I appreciate your attention.
Thanks, Bill. That was fantastic.
That was awesome.
So a question I have is like, I noticed that the map wasn't greened out in England. So what was the event that got these folks to say, hey, we need something? Like, what was the tragedy?
Well, I think it was mostly Tom Henderson, who is a Rotarian still in that club, though he's retired from most active work, and he's not a part of ShelterBox anymore. But he was a retired search and rescue diver, and it was really his thought process, and he led the assessment, because any good Rotary Club will do an assessment, and then they kind of assess the world at large in disaster relief. So it was just kind of that happenstance that the guy had some knowledge of what it took in extreme circumstances. He ignited the passion of the Rotarians around him. They put a plan together, and 20 years later, here we are.
Cool. Is that anybody questions? You gotta have some. How about this? So where are there shelter boxes around here? I mean, in terms of storage and around the United States, and then how many, like, what's the local cache of them? I mean, what's the average? 100 or 1,000 or how's that work?
So I didn't quite catch the second half of that question, but I'll answer the first half. And that we do have some supplies in the United States. We don't anticipate to ever have to respond in the United States. So we don't have a large amount of gear in the States. And it takes too much time to deploy gear out of the United States. Our gear is pre-positioned in places like Panama, Australia, the Philippines, Dubai, because there's great access all over Africa from the airports in Dubai, and some up in countries through Europe as well, because it's just easy to get gear out of a country. The second half of your question had some.
Well, I mean, what's the average if there's like a stash of them somewhere? How many, what's typical?
Oh, okay, great. So if Haiti happened today and we had to get all the gear from all over the world somewhere in a hurry, good question. We like to have a supply, a worldwide supply that's ahead of our supply chain. So if we had to gear up, we'd probably be able to help and start shipping 5,000 families worth of aid, at the go. And that's enough to where we could work with our tent manufacturer and the tarpaulin base. And it's not always, we don't buy tarps necessarily from the tarp factory. Sometimes we'll get them through the UN Council for Refugees or some large organization that has much more capacity than we do. And we'll actually get them through, or in perfect case scenarios, we order it all together. And we actually are working on a new tent that's going to look the same across the board from a lot of different organizations in that cluster that do shelter. And that way we could order them all at one time and save money.
Got it.
We help more families.
So is there a process? I mean, when they get delivered, is there like, hey, this is what this is for, and this is how we put it together, and like a class, or like how does that work?
Yeah, most definitely. So it's really a train the trainer scenario. So in Malawi last year, after Cyclone Idai, we grouped together with the local Rotary District governor. He rallied up some Rotarians, and we just sent just a sample what people could carry on a plane to get there, because the supply chain has to catch up with you, right? It's never there ahead of you. People could travel faster than gear. And so in that window, we were able to train people on everything they were going to get. And then those Rotarians, of course, they weren't the ones getting it. They were more concerned with other people in their communities than themselves, which is, Rotarian-ish. Yeah. And so they would go out, and we already did the assessment, knew who was going to get the gear, had everybody trained on how to use the gear before the gear even ever got there. So that kind of train the trainer thing, whenever possible, if we could train everyone in this club to do it, how many could you go train in your community today? And what about the day after that? The next thing you know, unfortunately, kind of like this disease spreads, but you have a great curve of help.
That's cool.
Yeah, I know, Bill. I know the question comes up all the time, and is ShelterBox, have they thought about? Because I know the question comes up where people say, "Can I buy one of these to have in my garage?" Kind of a deal. Have they thought about doing something that's maybe not as complete, that would work as a way to raise funds? You know what I mean? As a profit-making thing. I've heard at every event that I've been at where there's been ShelterBox, I've heard at least one person come up and ask the question, so.
Yeah, no, that's asked all the time. It has been for years. And It's been thought about from time to time. I mean, really serious consideration, but we're not in the business of being a business. We're in the business of being a nonprofit disaster relief organization, and to take on a whole nother line of what we do, even though I get it, you know, you buy one, you give one there. It works with socks, it works with shoes, but those are going, you know, that's a little bit different scenario than working in the midst of a disaster. So we do have some gear. I mean, you can buy hats and shirts online here and there, you know, stuff like that to help support us. I could send you a link how to get to our little shop. Merch,
Bill, merch,
right? Thanks, merch. Yeah, I should know that. I'm an old rocker myself, so so that we don't do that. And the same, I know another question that's dying to be asked here by somebody is about why we don't do this for like the homeless people here in California. And the answer is real simple. This is already being done by the homeless themselves in California. You see people using tarps and tents that are homeless all the time. And it's not improving their situation one bit. What really would improve their situation is some sort of permanent housing, like a tiny house. I mean, you see them on the Home Network and they're real fancy and they're like $200,000 and it's only 800 square feet. But the reality is you could do those for much, much less than that. And once you have a permanent structure, you could have an address. You would never give someone living under a tarp in your community, nor would our community leaders do it here. Give someone living under a tarp a physical address, but a tiny house would have that. And you could do take a large lot or whatever, and you could segment it out. It's not going to be it'll be minimal distancing for social distancing or whatever type of factors. We're trying it here in Sacramento. The plan they have might need to be altered now. It's still in the planning stages, but it had communal kitchens and like shower facilities for like 4 or 5 families. That probably have to be relooked at in light of the current situation and going forward. But with a physical address, you could get the government assistance because you have an address. So it's much easier to contact a person in need. And you could have things like a bus stop. You're not going to see a bus pull up as a public bus stop or even a school bus stop at a tent or someone living in a tarp. So kids might be able to go to school more consistently. So it's a situation that, you know, someone needs to do something. And I just don't think that something like tarps and tents is the answer for our chronic homelessness here in the States or anywhere for that matter.
So does anybody else I have another question. So
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering, Bill, the Rotary ambassadors you have, what do their jobs entail? They volunteer as a Rotary shelter ambassador.
Tell him everything, Bill. He's retired and has time.
Oh, perfect. It's actually the onboarding. Well, first, and I'll send an email with all these links and on the PDF of the slides and everything for you. Is you just go to the website and you sign up. And as an ambassador, that will go to our volunteer coordinator, Cherie. She's fabulous. She'll be right in touch with you and set you up for training. You learn all the ins and outs of ShelterBox. Some of what I did today, you won't be tasked to do right out the gate by any stretch, because I mean, I'm up to the minute information, and there's no way we could train a couple hundred ambassadors we have across across the country that quickly. But you're trained on the basics, and you're asked just to put whatever time you can. If it's 1 presentation a month or 2, or we got people who are nuts and do 4 or 5 within your district. We encourage growing beyond your Rotary visits, and enlist the congregations from local churches and schools, scouts, and it's not always necessarily about fundraising. Of course, we couldn't do anything without funds, but it's about awareness building as well, because people might not be able to donate today, but the next time something happens, they'll have heard of us, and that's a big advantage. So that's all it takes for an ambassador.
Yeah, Brian's wife, Terry, is on this call, and she would love to figure out how to get rid of him. And then we also have some other folks who are probably your neighbors who I saw, and it would probably be better to give them a first-hand presentation, or the Geestos. They live in Serrano and El Dorado Hills. And
They're on the call? Oh, John?
Yeah, you know John Geesto?
No, I don't. I don't know why not. If you made a Rotary Club online, you could make our online meeting Wednesday. You can
So
stay in
Bobby
your
would-
pajamas. We're a breakfast
Bobby
club, but
can-
we don't care.
Bobby can be a ShelterBox ambassador. Hi, Bobby.
Good to see you guys operating.
Thank you.
All
Yeah.
right.
I really miss.
busy and no work.
Our speaker is from El Dorado Hills.
Oh,
Oh, you set me up.
Yeah.
And
We
you
didn't-
fell for it.
Yeah.
We didn't know it. So a question I had, last one, I guess, unless somebody else, is like, how has the ShelterBox evolved in terms of adding new things, and how does it over time?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I got to kind of think about that. Well, and here's just one example. This is a solar light. I don't know how well it's showing up in my virtual background there. We didn't have these in our kits when I started as an ambassador in 2010. This item didn't exist for ShelterBox. It might have been out in the world a little bit, not Luminade, which is this particular brand we use, but they were out there, and we were on deployments and in areas where they typically have electricity, and in our post-distribution monitoring, we asked, is anything else that's missing that you need? And they said, yeah, the sun goes down, our kids can't read anymore, and life kind of shuts down. And we were like, there's these solar lights. And we used to use a different brand, and they weren't quite as reliable as Luminade. But it's like, this is a simple little system. It's not much bigger than Roger Hassler's wallet, really. So, so I mean, the similar story for all the aid we've done. The tents changed numerous times. Our original tents looked like Winnebagos, and they were great as long as it wasn't a crosswind. So, I mean, right out the gate, we learned we needed to change the tent. So Van Gogh's our tent manufacturer. They've been fantastic through the years. I don't know in the future how long they'll remain with us if we go with this whole cluster thing, because I don't know if they're in the bidding process for that or not. I'm not part of that part of the organization. But everything we have has adapted. The water filters changed through the years. We used to do the little purification tablets. We're all familiar with those that have been in Rotary for a while. They don't work real good in humid conditions, and it's really hard to translate the proper use of something like that. So gravity-fed water filter, 15 minutes worth of explanation, and really we probably do it in 5, but there's translation and understanding issues wherever we're going. That's evolved over time. Plus, the one we use currently is much more compactable for shipping than the old one. So, everything. Maybe not the wooden cooking spoon. I don't know how we've evolved that, but pretty much everything else in our kit. We're always looking for what's next. Maybe in the future, fold out or roll out solar panels or something. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Bill, what does a full-up kit cost, or the donation for it from our group cost you?
Well, that's a good question. There was one point in our history, I'd say $1,000 helps a family, and that was the way we operated for the first 12, 15 years. But when we started doing tarp-based shelter, and when we learned that people don't need the whole box every time, they need segments of that box, instantly we were able to help more families for that same $1,000. So now, if all they need is a repair kit, or the tarp you saw like over the roofs of the refugees, we're helping, that's $100 per kit. So you could help 10 families, or in those cases where there's multiple families, you could help even more people for $1,000. You could help 10 families for that same $1,000. But like in Vanuatu, there's 90% destruction on the islands that we're concentrating on right now. And I couldn't remember them, would not be able to pronounce them if I could. But on those islands, it's going to be full boxes, because everything's blown off the island. There's just splinters of trees left. So they're going to need everything. And so that's going to be $1,000 a family for something like that. So really between $100 and $1,000, it's just a matter of what that specific need is in that disaster. Thanks for the question, Otis.
Anybody else? I guess that's a no. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Welcome back, Gistos, and Terry, thanks for joining us, and Eva, thank you for joining us. And then Bill, obviously, thank you so much for this presentation. Hopefully we can meet one day in El Dorado Hills or at a district conference or somewhere else.
Yeah,
That was
or in
fantastic.
your area.
Yeah, or yeah, feel free, Phil, we'd love to have you come down. Actually, one of our members was texting me that we've done a house concert at my house, and he's like, let's have a house concert as a fundraiser for this. That was Greg, so that would be a fun.
I'll bring tents. We can make a big thing. We do things like that. We have a big event down in Santa Barbara, and all Rotarians from all sorts of different clubs come. And we actually, I can't promise them, and I'm sure your band's just as good, but we actually had Kenny Loggins do a couple of songs there because he lives in the Santa Barbara area. So I'm all for that. I can bring a bunch of tents and whatever it takes to make it successful. Count me in.
That'd be cool. I don't know if we can get Kenny Loggins, but we'll get somebody. That'd be cool. That's awesome. Okay, does anybody have anything else? Brian, anything?
Dave Olson is working on getting our next speaker. So
Okay,
we'll see what
good
happens.
job, Dave.
Thank
If
you.
not, Bill would love to come back and join us.
Yeah, or I can recommend one too. I'll do it offline with you, Ken, and regarding local human trafficking here in California. It's a wonderful organization, and they were the beneficiaries, one of the reverse global grant, which was $250,000, which came into the Sacramento area. So
Ah.
Yeah, that doesn't happen very often, does it? Yeah, that doesn't
Okay, I don't
happen.
mean to be rude. I don't mean to be rude, guys. I have to go. Good to see you all.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Bill.
All right,
Bye.
thanks, Rebecca.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, no, that would be cool to get that information to learn more.
I'll
about
send it along to you.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, well, everybody, thank you again. Eastos, Bobby, I see you in the background.
Yeah.
All right. All right. We will see you guys next week, and I'm sure Olson will have just maybe not as good as Bill, but almost as good. All right. Okay, everybody have a safe week, and we will see you next week. Ring your bell, Brian.
All right.
Okay, goodbye.
Hey,
Give everybody a
KT.
bell.
KT.
What?
What?
Oh, KT.
KT, did you say you had you did your fence at your house, your fence?
Yeah, I had a guy fix it. Alonzo. You want him?
Yeah, I need a fence guy actually right now.
Is he gonna, is it a repair or a whole redo?
It's gonna be a repair.
Okay, yeah, Alonzo's a good guy. All right, I'll text you his info.
Okay,
I
thanks.
think, Paul,
Okay, buddy.
you want to say something, Paul? You want to say something, Paul?
I think Brian pretty much close. I was wanted to say something about Fred. You know, and I've been staying very tight with Eric, and he had a really tough night the night before last, and we were afraid that was going to be it because he'd been talking that way, and he wanted to die at home, and on and on and on. He blamed me that he was sick. He thought so. We had a good luck. But anyway,
What'd you do to him?
had a good night that night where he slept about 5 hours. And then when he was awake this morning, yesterday at 6 o'clock, after a while, he fell asleep again. So he's getting a little strength. We're going to see what's happening after today. I'm going to have a call with his son about 4:30. So, but it was really bad. It was really bad. So anyway, hopefully things will pick up today.
All right.
Yeah, and that's it. Thank you.
All right, Paul, let me know. Let me know what happens. So I can tell everybody. Okay?
Okay, yeah, let us know, Paul. Okay,
All right.
Text message.
bye,
KT.
everybody.
Bye.
Mine? Yeah.